Everybody. I'm excited to be popping on in here to do our day one for our compassionate communication training. And I wanted to just start our discussion here talking about what brought this training about. So a little background. This training I am doing, and I'm doing it free, and I'm doing it live because in my larger private Facebook group, this particular group is a free group. I do have smaller paid groups for individuals that have purchased my online courses, and we are streaming this through there as well. But I decided to stream this through YouTube, Instagram, and all of my Facebook groups because one thing that has been occurring is my online platform has grown exponentially. And there's obviously probably a lot of reasons for that. But there have been a lot of growing pains in terms of maintaining the culture that I wanted to cultivate on my online platform. And that is a culture of compassionate discussion and discourse. Among our posts, but particularly among the comments as well, because I wanted individuals to feel as though they were being served by the group in some way and by the information that I share across all my platforms. And one thing that I came to realize is that when individuals find themselves stumbling upon something like attachment theory and attachment styles, which tends to be the framework through which I discuss my psycho-spiritual approach to creative arts interventions and working with healing insecure attachment, individuals will arrive at this information after they've been operating for a long time under a largely unconscious way of being, right, on an unconscious level. And of course, that's totally okay. That's just where we are in our process. And the truth is that we can't know what we don't know. And so when people first come into my online spaces, they might feel challenged. And that's because we are challenging you to move beyond a kind of unconscious reaction to limiting beliefs. And we are asking you to step into a shared space that requires you to show up with an attitude of intention, with respect to how you express yourself, as well as empathy and compassion for the way that you respond to other people's perspectives and realities, especially those that feel very different from your own. And so that means that not everybody is quite ready to engage in the group the instant that they join it. And so we really encourage new members, subscribers to lurk as much as they need to and get a sense of the group culture and the community and witness a model for how to communicate from a place of having processed some of the deeper emotions that may come up. Now, in today's lesson, this is day 1 out of 3, we're going to talk more about what are processed emotions versus unprocessed emotions. But the first thing I want to say is to just kind of give a little warning and a heads up that if you are someone who is just coming to this and you've suppressed your feelings for a long time, or you feel like you've never been validated or that you've never been acknowledged, it's helpful to know that attempting to speak from a conscious place at first is going to feel like over-intellectualizing. It's going to feel like you're suppressing your voice. It's going to feel like someone is asking you to sterilize your experience, and resentments are likely to grow, which is to say you cannot jump ahead. There is a process for processing your feelings. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And once we are more conscious of what that process might be, then you can make a more discerning decision about how you want to show up into spaces of discourse and discussion from a more conscientious place, okay? And that means that we have to allow some of our emotions that have been unacknowledged. You have to allow yourself to experience them, allow them to move through you before you really dive into commentary per se. But at any time when you join, you can certainly express gratitude and curiosity. And so some examples of comments that we may be looking for to start practicing conscientious exchanges or conscious exchanges include things like, well, thank you for sharing that with us. I can imagine it must feel. Or thank you for sharing that with us. It reminds me of a time when I felt. It means a lot to hear you say that, and I feel like I can relate to. I find this really interesting, and I was wondering if you could clarify. I'm intrigued by what you're saying, and I find myself wondering about. Maybe you have a strong reaction. You might say, I admit, I feel a strong resistance to what you're saying. Anger even comes up for me, but I want to know more about that because that could be tipping me off to the fact that there's something I can learn from here. Okay, so these are just quick examples of how we might try to respond with compassion and with curiosity. And if you want to learn more about that, I do invite you to check out my YouTube channel. I have a video called How Neediness Can Empower You. And a lot of individuals have told me that that video was particularly helpful for them in understanding this concept. So this is the thing I want to also touch upon before we get into the meat of today's presentation. And that is what happens when we dive in too soon. Okay, so sometimes when people express whatever immediately surfaces for them without a filter or without a sense of intentionality or without a consideration for the environment or the people that you are in the room with, in the context of the group that we are trying to build, and we are building a psychoeducational forum. I'm going to talk about why that's different than a psychotherapeutic forum in just a second. But when that happens, it's basically an inability to incorporate the mission of the group's collective experience, and your impact on it. And that's likely because you've been taught you have no impact, or you believe you have no impact, okay? But I want to let you know that you do. And so this is kind of like walking into a 5-star restaurant and you eat the most expensive dinner on the menu with your fingers and you lick the sauce off the plate and you kind of belch to express your satisfaction. And I want to say this with the deepest respect, love, and empathy, because I promise you, I was this person, that this is unconscious behavior, it's unprocessed behavior, and it can come across as privileged and entitled. And entitlement comes from a need to feel special. And we usually adopt this attitude because deep down we don't feel special. And no one ever listened to us or validated our experience. And so we have a tendency to constantly need to affirm ourselves in every interaction that we have. Now, inadvertently, we may not intend for this to happen, but inadvertently, it will offend our chef, who's worked their whole life to be able to prepare a meal with just the right flavor, texture, and presentation so that you can have a memorable and pleasurable experience. And everyone else is around you is trying to have that experience while enjoying the atmosphere. But from your perspective, you're hungry, the food tastes so good, and damn it, you have a right to eat it. Anyone else that might be disrupted by your display is prudish or stifling your expression. And you know what? That's okay too, because that's where you are in your process. And maybe no one taught you how the place settings work or the value of the food on your plate. Maybe no one helped you to realize how visible you are, and you are visible. We see you. Everyone around you sees you, and you have an impact on the people that surround you. And maybe you haven't yet learned how to savor experience by taking your time or noticing and absorbing the nuances of your environment, because you've been deprived for so long and you've been so concerned with just finding any form of nourishment at all. And in the right time and place, it is fun to eat with your fingers, hence my burrito obsession, to lick the plate, and I do that every time I have pancakes, and then to belch and laugh at our own satisfaction and contentment. And this I do every time with my son, and he absolutely giggles and laughs and loves it when I do. So there is a place for you to use shared spaces like support groups or counselors and therapists to help you process these immediate needs and feelings and impulses, okay? So that you can make sense of them in a safe and boundaried environment. But I've created this training here today to help explain and define those boundaries for our group specifically, because our group is not a safe place for that. It's not what the space is intended for. It's distinctly psychoeducational as opposed to psychotherapeutic. And as a licensed and board-certified clinician, I cannot ethically encourage a true psychotherapeutic discourse in my online spaces because the boundaries are unclear and they're uncontrollable beyond what I can offer in terms of cultivating a group culture through the medium of social media. So what we, myself and the other group administrators, have done in my online spaces to promote a safe environment for psychoeducational discourse and exchange include the following. So we have posted group etiquette and rule reminders twice a day. We screen all potential posts, and at this time we get about upwards of 50 posts per day for review. We offer downloadable posting guides with Mad Lib templates and examples on how you can pose your questions compassionately. We do trainings like this, and we answer FAQs on live streams. And we also monitor reported comments and rely on the group members to let us know when they see content that doesn't jive with our group mission. So this group is really defined as a psychoeducational space. And again, that is as opposed to psychotherapeutic. And the distinction is important because the context is very different. And so with respect to our group mission, our goals for posting and commenting, and also what stage you may be at in your process. Now, I know this may seem a little serious for a Facebook group, especially a free one, but we do take our group mission and culture very seriously. And what is so incredibly special about this group is that we try our best to honor the mission statement, to provide our members with adequate guidance and modeling for how to contribute to a psychoeducational forum and discussion, an attitude of compassion, curiosity, and an awareness for the boundaries of the group rules. Okay. We want to create a place where you can practice what you're learning. And so our mission, more succinctly stated, is to provide a safe space where people that have different perspectives can learn from each other in a healthy and respectful way so that we can expand into consciousness together. Okay. Now, this does not mean that members have license to post and comment on whatever occurs to them in the moment. So posts that are approved to our feed are usually typically relevant to one of the following categories, and that is advice, empathy, validation, information, reflection, clarification, inspiration, and creativity. Okay. Now, if this is something you're interested in learning more about, if you're joining me on Instagram, you can join our Facebook feed through the link in my bio. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will post a link to join us in the caption of this live stream when we're done. And once you join the group, you gain access to a posting guideline. We have a whole guide that you can download. It's like 10 pages, and it walks you through how to articulate yourself in a way that opens up the dialogue and the conversation in terms of what posts you create and also what kind of commentary you might offer. And we also have several group rules, which I won't go over at this time. If you decide to join us, you can check out those rules for yourself. Now, here today, I want to talk a little bit about the inspiration for our training. And I'm going to be referencing heavily the work of Marshall Rosenberg. It's probably a little reversed for you on the recording, but his book is called Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. So I'm going to be drawing heavily from his work, and I highly recommend you go out and get the book if that's something you're interested in. And I'm going to be joining you here today, tomorrow, and Friday at 1 o'clock. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the major highlights from the book, and I'm also going to be blending it with the way I talk about things, particularly attachment styles and romantic involvement. But if you're interested in following along, I highly recommend checking out the book. So I would like to now more officially, it's kind of an intro, giving a little framework and background for what brings us here today and why I'm streaming through multiple platforms with this content here. Now, here on day one, I want to talk about defining conscious exchange. Okay, and so it's going to include the following bullets, and that is we're going to look at unconscious communications that block compassion and how to recognize them. We're going to be looking at the difference between processed and unprocessed emotions and how they might be verbally expressed. We're also going to give 3 quick tips on how to handle a triggered response once you're already in that spiral. And lastly, we're going to succinctly define a conscious exchange and how that applies to the framework. So the first thing I want to talk about is these unconscious communications that block compassion and how we can recognize that. So in Rosenberg's book, there's this underlying assumption that our natural state is actually one of loving compassion. That love, although love is not necessarily recognized as an emotion, because emotions change from one moment to the next, so much as it is a focus of intention and behavior. So love is a choice about how we decide to treat our partners and incorporate them into our lives. And the more conscious that choice is, the more loving we can be. And there is, however, a certain form of language, which Rosenberg describes as life alienating communication, which alienates us from our natural state of love and compassion. So these ways of communicating include making comparisons, denying responsibility, expressing desires as demands, and moralistic judgments. Now, for our purposes here today, I'm going to dig a little bit more deeply into moralistic judgments because this is the common go-to communication style I see popping up in my online forum. But I encourage you to purchase the book. It's a great book to learn more about how Rosenberg conceptualizes these other three types of life alienating communication. So let's talk a little bit more about moralistic judgments. So a moralistic judgment basically implies wrongness or badness on the part of people who don't act in harmony with our values. So blame, insults, put-downs, labels, criticism, comparisons, and even diagnoses are forms of judgment. And the goal of moralistic judgments is to classify and categorize people and their actions. So we become more concerned with what you are rather than who you are. And I see this happening a lot, especially when people first start delving into things like attachment styles, because the categories kind of help us draw lines around our experience. But there's a challenge that sometimes we get stuck there and we're not able to move fluidly along these states, recognizing that these states are more dimensional. And I talk more about that on my YouTube channel and also on my IGTV channel. Now, in psychology, when this becomes severe, this categorizing people, dichotomizing people, it can become habitual. And that is sometimes referred to as splitting. So most of our attention becomes focused on analyzing and determining these degrees of wrongness based on the categories we are assigning people to. And so when and how we analyze other people, however, is usually just an expression of our own needs and values. So for example, if a partner wants more affection than I'm willing to give them, then I might perceive them as too needy and dependent from my perspective, right? But if I want more affection than my partner is giving me, then I see them as aloof and insensitive. It's also more important not to confuse value judgments with moralistic judgments. So we all make value judgments regarding the qualities that we want and value in our life, like honesty or freedom or devotion or consistency, loyalty, nurturance, and a host of other values. And these values reflect our beliefs about how our quality of life can best be served. Basically, these are compatibility dimensions, as I like to refer to them in relationships. And so we have a tendency to make moralistic judgments about people whose behaviors don't support our own value judgments. So this is where, for those of you that are joining me on YouTube and Facebook, I'm going to share my screen. But if you're joining me here on Instagram, you can just follow along verbally and feel free to type in the captions there in the comments your responses. I'm going to share my screen. I want to show you a slide. And we're going to do a little activity here together to help tease out our moralistic judgments from our value judgments. And if you're someone who feels like you struggle a bit with boundary confusion or discernment versus judgment, we talked a lot about that in the last live coaching program I did for energy expansion. This is an exercise that might help you work through that. Okay, so what I've got on the screen here, for those of you that are not able to see it, is a list of values that we might harbor in love. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but it's a list of values that I've seen pop up over and over again in my online community and also when I've done surveys of my list. So we have things like authenticity, intimacy, freedom, friendship, belongingness, commitment, compromise, faithfulness, generosity, comfort, growth, humility, leisure, novelty, stimulation, stability, tradition, knowledge, intellectualism, excitement, family, nurturance, passion, protectiveness, responsibility, sexuality, and spirituality. And again, this is just to name a few. So this is where I'd like to get a little bit of engagement with those of you that are joining me here today. If you could type there in the comments, what are your top 5 values in love? And you could draw them straight from this list, or you could pick ones that you don't see on this list and just type them there in the chat box. And once I start to see some of those answers coming in, we are going to do an exercise together with that. So for example, I'm going to switch my slide here. Okay, so let's see. Once I start seeing some answers, give me some answers. We've got more than 60 people here on the call across platforms. I'd love to see someone type in just one value that you have in love. What's one thing you value? Everybody's shy. Okay, honesty, humor, sexuality, spirituality, passion, freedom, authenticity. Yes, we can go back to the list if you're not able to see it. And it doesn't have to be on this list if you don't want it. You know, if you've got something that's not on this, by all means. Intimacy and growth, family and intellectualism, openness, great. Kindness, sure. Faithfulness, integrity, passion, joy, acceptance, peace, fairness, communication, friendship. These are all wonderful values. Authenticity, stability, great. Openness is a good one. Yeah. Okay, so let's take some of these and we're going to do this together. I'm going to take a value. Let's see, I'm just going to pick one. So let's say, I'm going to pick one that's been popping up more. Let's say honesty or integrity is a good one. I'm going to do integrity because that one's probably subject to interpretation, right? What is integritus? So this will be a good one to demonstrate. So for those of you who are watching this on Instagram or you're not able to see what I'm doing here on the screen, we're gonna sort of together hash out what is the value judgment around integrity versus the moralistic judgment around integrity, okay? And this is gonna lead into what we're talking about with respect to observations and evaluations in just a moment. So now in the comments there, if you could just type in, how might integrity make you a good person? How does integrity make you a good person? Why would integrity be something that you might value? Why? How does integrity make you a good person? It's hard, right? Because you're like, well, integrity is good. It's just good. Why is it good? Why is it good? People know that they can count on you. Okay, so dependability, right? Integrity might mean that you're dependable. Now y'all get to discover how much of a bad speller I am. Okay. The other person can trust me to treat them well. Trust. So it encourages trust or fosters trust. What else? Yep, fosters trust, predictable behavior. So predictability is kind of like consistency, right? Similar to dependability. And why might dependability, consistency be good? Why is that good? What can we accomplish when we have those things in relationship? Helps you set boundaries, right? Shrink my text size here. What else? And I'll share these slides once we're done on my platform. right? Consistency in your life, right? Well, why would consistency be good? Why is some people don't necessarily want consistency in their life. They get bored. So why for you would that be good? Safety. Okay. Feeling safe helps you feel safe, right? And what happens when you feel safe? I'm just taking a peek at some of these other comments here. When your words and actions align with your stated values, whatever they are, it gives room for the other person to trust that their partner's authentic and a root to ground on. Sure. Comfort, right? Certainty, security. Okay. And when we feel comfort, certainty, and security, now what? Now what do we get to do? What happens? When we're not worried about feeling secure anymore, what do we do? Now what? Now who am I? Now what defines my values? Maybe we don't know yet. Right? Now I get to be vulnerable. Right? Get to be vulnerable. And why is it good to be vulnerable? I'm going to just add, and that allows me to connect more deeply, and that allows me to know myself better, which allows me to grow or expand, I'm going to use my own language here, into the corners of myself and build something purposeful and meaningful and pleasurable in my life. Would you agree with that? Just give me a little thumbs up there if you would agree with that. Okay. So this is why we might value something, any one of these value dimensions. Most of them, I would argue, would ultimately boil down to some kind of statement like this, right? So now let's tease this out so this is great, right? This is great. This is all about the desires, the love, the compassion, the vision that we have for being in a state of in alignment with our most deeply held values. And we hold these values because if we're able to accomplish them and or meet someone with whom we experience compatibility with these values, then our quality of life is improved. We feel more meaningful. We feel more purposeful in everything that we do. And that creates a sense of abundance. It creates a sense of connectedness, right? It makes us very satisfied. Now, what about the moralistic judgments we might make of someone who does not value these things? Now, integrity is actually a really good value for us to be digging into here today because, as I kind of mentioned before, some of us might associate integrity with consistency. Some of us might associate integrity with stability, safety, security. But is it necessarily? Is it necessarily? What if integrity is about being able to seek and find and experience novel stimulation, to ride the waves of instability, to look for change in the environment because you feel enlivened by that, right? So in that case, someone might associate integrity with something very different, okay? That someone might feel like unless they meet someone who is that way, that they're not actually comfortable opening up and being vulnerable with them for fear of their reality butting up against someone else's and incurring a moralistic judgment about that. So what's a moralistic judgment you might make of someone who doesn't value these things? So let's say we are associating integrity with consistency and security, okay? What's a moralistic judgment we might make of someone who does not associate integrity with consistency and security? What moralistic judgment might we make? So someone's saying it's easier to create intimacy for someone who values integrity as an expression of stability and consistency, right? But what if it's not? Is it easier to establish intimacy with someone who doesn't have the same values? who doesn't define integrity in the same way. Right. So a moralistic judgment might be they are self-centered. They are unreliable. They are irresponsible, right? They lack morality. They are not safe to be around. Okay. Let's see. They don't know what's right and wrong. Okay. They don't know what is right and wrong. That's a good one, especially since we're talking about moralistic judgments as being dichotomous. I can't trust them. They make bad choices, right? Sure. Unpredictable, right? Yeah. Immoral, lack morality, sure. Untrustworthy, okay. Okay. So this is how we might start to tease out. I just want to do this as a little demo here for you today. These are how we might start to tease out our value judgments versus our moralistic judgments. And actually something kind of emerged in our discussion here, which I didn't anticipate, but is really important, is to recognize how we are defining our values, right? How do we define integrity? So thank you for those of you that participated in the discourse here, because that allowed us to have another insight into how we can dig into some of this. So let's see if I can bring us back to the main screen. Okay. Now, the next thing I wanted to address with this, and it's an extension of what we've talked about and kind of discovered here in our discourse, is there's a difference between making an observation and an evaluation. So the life alienating communications, particularly moralistic judgments, which is what we're focusing on here, but remember there are 3 others, and if you want to learn about them, I invite you to pick up Rosenberg's book. Oftentimes we can have these life alienating communications, particularly moralistic judgments, manifest through a blending of what Rosenberg defines as an observation with an evaluation. And that's important because when you combine an observation with an evaluation, we usually experience it as a criticism. So observations on their own, however, can be super important because it allows us to kind of intuit the underlying meaning or desire for connection that most people express in every communication. So nonviolent communication or compassionate communication, as I'm talking about it here today, it doesn't necessarily require that we have to completely be objective and refrain from making our own evaluations, but it does require that we express our own conscious awareness around what are our observations and then the evaluations that we are deducing from them, okay? So Rosenberg offers a couple of examples. So for example, here's a statement expressed as an evaluation. So John was angry with me yesterday for no reason. Let's express this as an observation. John told me he was angry, and then he slammed the table with his fist. Okay. So why is one an evaluation and the other an observation? Well, the phrase "for no reason" is an inferred evaluation that basically dismisses whatever reasons John had for being visibly upset. And so it implies that the person making the evaluation, that their thoughts, feelings, and intentions or desires are the only right and valid ones that exist. Additionally, it could be inaccurate or, let's say, incomplete. John might have also been feeling hurt or scared or sad or something deeper. And typically anger is kind of a blanket that we toss over feelings like that. Here's one more example. My aunt complains when I talk to her. So this we would consider an evaluation. How would we restate that as an observation? My aunt called me 3 times last week, and we discussed her discomfort when people treat her in ways that she doesn't like. So in this instance, the word complains is basically a verb that expresses an evaluative connotation. So it indicates judgment while also potentially invalidating the aunt's experience, right? So it's also important to make sure that our evaluations, that we acknowledge what we observe and then the evaluation that we are deducing from it. And when we deduce our evaluations, it's also to keep in mind the context and the time, right? Because as we all know, when you take something that someone says out of context, it can drastically change its meaning and thus its impact, okay? So I want to offer a case study, and this is of a heterosexual couple, and I'm going to call them John and Sally, and this is really more of an amalgamation of experiences and cases and clients that I've seen over the years. So it is written and intended to be kind of an archetypal case that ideally will touch something in you. So most of the communications and resentments that occur in relationships tend to stem from a way of relating to the world and everyone in it based on an essential fear of being incompetent or being unworthy. So for example, let's say Sally says something like, "You don't care about me." And John might respond, "Well, of course I care about you. That's my job. Why do you think I'm trying to fix this problem for you?" So John might reason that because he's preoccupied with solving a problem that in some way benefits Sally, then she should know that he cares. But Sally might perceive that response as a way that John is trying to avoid giving her direct attention and caring. So her comment makes him feel incompetent, and now Sally doesn't trust him to meet her needs. So this is where it's useful to look at what I call deep structure versus surface structure communications. So deep structure communications are the essence of what someone is trying to communicate. And this is what I believe compassionate communication is really trying to get at. Surface structure communications are like the literal interpretation of the words and or a focus on the content rather than the connection or the meaning behind the words. So usually this is where we find those defensive or what Rosenberg would call violent communications. So for example, Sally says something like, "I feel like you never listen to me." Now, first of all, it's not really a feeling statement, but it's a criticism and it's an evaluation of John. And what she's feeling is lonely, scared, frustrated, and maybe a little bit helpless. Now, most likely she doesn't expect the word never to be taken literally, but it happens to be the word that she chose to communicate the frustration she feels in that moment and the fear that John is losing interest in her. Now, for Sally, a deep structure way of saying this might be, "I feel frustrated and hurt, and I'm worried that you're losing interest in me." Now, this isn't bad, but I might pre-frame the statement, include an observation and also a repair option with that communication so that John has a place to go with it. So I might add to this statement something like, "I'm feeling frustrated and hurt, and I'm worried that you're losing interest in me because I've noticed that you're calling me less. You've canceled our plans twice in 3 weeks, and I noticed that you're exchanging messages with someone online. I'm also wondering how you are feeling, and if together we might be able to sort this out." Okay. And so from John's, and now before I move on, I just want to say these are my words, obviously, but these are not the only words that you could use. You will have your own voice and your own vernacular and your own vocabulary for how to express this sentiment. But this is an example of what I might offer as an underlying structure, which is to recognize the real feeling and be able to articulate that, to offer a distinct observation as opposed to an evaluation, and then to give a repair option. And when I say repair option, it means open up the dialogue, assume you don't necessarily know, in this case, what John's going to say or how he's going to respond, and then inviting them into a co-creative process with you for moving forward with it. Okay. So it's solution focused rather than problem focused. Now, let's say from John's perspective, going back to going back to, let's say, Sally's initial statement, which is, I feel like you never pay attention to me anymore, or something like that. Now, John is likely to struggle with honoring Sally's feelings and wanting to stay connected to her if she is communicating her emotions through criticism and an evaluation, especially if she's using vague and inaccurate words. Okay. So in that case, he's more likely to feel triggered, to slip into a defensive mode or response. He might respond in kind with criticism, stonewall, shut down. This is John Gottman's language. I recommend checking out his book, 7 Principles to Make Marriage Work. He might also explode or otherwise find some way to get away from her. And it may be to preserve the relationship. The withdrawal or the fight or flight response is actually a way to preserve the relationship in this case, most often. So how do we stop a spiral of violent and defensive communication that focuses primarily on content at this point? Because that's what's going to happen. So you want to try and keep in mind the emotions behind the words and focus on the connection and not the content, because every communication human beings have, whether it's discussing the mysteries of the universe or arguing over who forgot to buy the toothpaste, it's really about experiencing deepening or lessening degrees of connection. And we use the content of our conversations to evaluate the quality and the proximity of our current connection. So how might Sally's word choice reflect her fears about the quality of the connection to John in this moment, right? So it's likely to indicate a lot of fear and helplessness. Also keep in mind that Sally's fears may not be about John at all, but it could be a displacement of something else onto John. And if that's the case, Sally is likely to be unaware that she is doing it in the moment. She's also likely to identify with her ego defenses and the immediate thoughts that they generate as the truth of her experience. So she will think, this is who I am, and you can take it or leave it. And then she'll experience an internal split, like we talked about before. And now she'll start to view more compassionate ways of communicating as sterilized or intellectualized, and then reject them. Okay. But this is often because we confuse our thoughts, which are typically evaluating judgments, particularly if we are insecure, with our actual feelings. Or thought patterns are thought patterns, and our ego defenses are typically the result of years of conditioning and limiting belief structures that have snowballed over time. And so our feelings, on the other hand, are actually ever changing. And the radio dial for what I like to call your most essential self, or your true self, or your higher knowing, or your spirit, or your unconscious self, or whatever vernacular you like to use. So in other words, compassionate communication does not have to be sterile, and it doesn't have to be overly intellectualized. You can use more compassionate and true words while crying, while vibrating with anger and appearing red-faced, while crossing your arms and scrunching up your face, while deepening your voice and putting a little backbone into it. Okay. In fact, the truer your words are to the essence of your communication, the more energy and power they will have, and you will feel it, and so will your partner. Now, if John can hold a conscious position in the face of Sally's, let's say in this case, unconscious displacement, he can bring the discussion into the present moment and the current relationship, as opposed to falling down that rabbit hole of triggering old baggage and repeating previous patterns of defensive and violent communication. So John might say something like, I can see you're upset, and I want to help you feel better, because your feelings matter to me, but I think I do listen to you. So your accusation makes me feel unacknowledged and hurt and a bit under attack. Maybe you can specifically tell me what you don't like, and what would help you to feel listened to, and then I can clarify for you the best ways to get my attention moving forward, right? Now, if Sally can respond positively to this, then she's basically giving John a roadmap to success for deepening his connection to her and vice versa. If, however, and this is not something Rosenberg talks about in his book, this is something I've noticed over 15 years of working with individuals like this. If, However, Sally struggles with very deep insecure fears. She might reject emotionally honest and compassionate communication because deep down she is afraid of getting closer to John. Her underlying fear may be that he will discover she isn't good enough for him and abandon her or something similar. Or maybe she doesn't know how to discern her observations from her evaluations. So answering a direct question like this about her feelings or her internal state feels assaultive and confusing. And so to avoid the anxiety that creates, she continues to act and communicate unconsciously and defensively, which keeps John at a distance while dressing him up in the role of the offending party. And so she might accuse him of patronizing her, of trying to make it all about him. She might call him lazy and inconsiderate for not being able to figure it out on his own. She might try to placate him, withdraw, behave passive-aggressively, or comply on the surface, but then emotionally distance herself while stalking his social media and monitoring his every move. And so this sets John up to repeatedly fail, while continually chasing a carrot of rightness in front of his nose. And so on an unconscious level, this keeps Sally feeling safe from the threat of John realizing her unworthiness. And so she feels more in control of her visibility and her power. It also, to some degree, keeps her feeling morally superior to John while providing clarity around her role in the relationship. And so she feels less afraid of him leaving her. But on a conscious level, she still feels upset. She feels alone. She feels alienated. She's frustrated and she's confused about why everything that she's trying hasn't worked. It doesn't seem to be bringing them closer. She's not feeling the connection, and John only appears to become increasingly turned off, right? So this brings us to the difference between processed and unprocessed emotions, okay? And now that we know a little bit more about the difference between an evaluation and an observation, you will notice that an expression of an unprocessed emotion typically consists of negative thoughts and judgmental evaluations fueled by a powerful energetic charge in the body and in our psyche. And so when we are in the throes of being powered up or highly stimulated by our environments or our partners, if the ego perceives this stimulus as a threat, it will employ negative evaluations to protect itself and to reinforce the rightness of its own values and worldview. And so when this happens, you will feel triggered, and as if you are forced to identify with the thoughts or the feelings. So you'll escape to your head with intellectualism and detachment, or you become swamped by your feelings, feel dysregulated, and potentially act impulsively. But truly, you are the space in between your thoughts and feelings. You are the conscious part that reflects upon the nature of your thoughts and feelings. And that is why statements like, I feel angry, or I have angry feelings right now, or I'm in an angry state that is hard to get out of, is really a more accurate thing to say than I am angry. And if we're totally unconsciously identified with that kind of energy charge, we might just scream or hit something, right? So I want to pause here and emphasize once again that screaming and hitting something has its time and place. It has its time and place. I'm not saying don't do that ever in your life. To learn about the emotional charge, sometimes you have to let yourself feel it. You have to be identified with it, to roll around on the ground and kick your hands and feet, to smash stuff, to throw axes. But I would do this in a safe space where it can be gently and compassionately organized and contextualized in a way that serves you into a state of expanding awareness. And so therapeutic spaces with trained practitioners are designed to facilitate this. And sometimes we experience this type of healing and facilitation of, let's call it emotional growth, in our romantic relationships, our familial relationships, and even close friendships. And so sharing our raw emotional experiences with a loved one who can and wants to help us negotiate that terrain can be a deeply intimate bonding experience. Attachment theorists call this attunement and co-regulation. And so the degree to which this fosters safety and growth for you, your partner, and the relationship as a whole really depends on your values, your compatibility, the personal boundaries of those involved, the trauma histories of those involved, and the subjective experiences of everyone involved, right? Now, after feeling that raw emotion and letting it move through you, now you might have arrived at a place of having processed some of them. Now, most people walk around with a chip on their shoulder because they're refusing to actually feel the emotions they claim to suffer with. Because in truth, they aren't feeling them. They are fighting them. Okay? And so an expression of a processed emotion is a conscious recognition of the emotional charge as important information that is not to be ignored, but it is also not to be placed in charge. And so once we can accomplish this, then we are better able to discern if our evaluations are moralistic judgments or they're simply a value judgment. We are also less afraid of feeling our emotions because we're not attaching arbitrary or overblown meanings to them. So remember, moralistic judgments label people and affect life-alienating communication. Value judgments help us develop a healthy sense of boundaries and discernment while maintaining a compassionate stance towards those that have different values than us, right? And this is typically helped by using observations and expressing curiosity. So this is where I think the real treasure lies, in acknowledging our negative evaluations and unprocessed emotions, because they're kind of like these giant road signs that point us toward the places that still need love and care and gentle regard. And they can also help us formulate really good questions, because at the center of every really good question lies the impetus for its answer. Okay, I truly believe that. Okay, so I just briefly want to go over 3 quick tips to help you manage being triggered when it's happened. And if you want more detail on this, check out my Instagram channel and feed. I have a video on there that talks a little bit more about how to handle feeling triggered. But in essence, it's 3 things that I would offer. Let's say you're already in a spiral and you want to move towards being more compassionate and conscientious, because with every word that comes out of your mouth, you can make that choice. So the first thing you want to do is attend to your body and its responses. So noticing, becoming aware of, creating an inventory of what is the physical sensation you feel when you find yourself slipping into that triggered state, that survival mode state, okay? I might recommend putting your hand there, breathing into it, and then finding a literal physical support around you. Put a hand on a desk, on the back of a chair, lean against the wall, sit down on the ground and cross your legs. But notice a physical support. Then conjure a visual anchor. This is a safe place, a serene location. You might even have an affirmative mantra that you plan in advance proactively to repeat in your mind to help ground you in the body and in the moment. And lastly, once again, focus on connection and not content. What are the reassurances that your partner is looking for in this exchange, in this dialogue? What are the reassurances that you are looking for? Once you can pay attention to that rather than the content of the conversation, you can start to shift your proximity, the connection that is unfolding between you, towards a more compassionate and, let's say, harmonious place. And so with that, I'm going to leave you with the definition of the conscious exchange, which is that we are coming to a place of discourse that allows us to speak from a place of compassion, of, to some degree, processed emotion, and also a willingness to be curious about the experiences of others and to be aware of when we are making an observation versus an evaluation, and being able to determine, is this evaluation a moralistic judgment or is it simply a value judgment? And once you know that, now you're cooking with gas with defining your personal boundaries. So thank you for joining me here today. I see some wonderful comments there in the feed. I'm going to look over those before I come back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place. And if you want to be a part of the discussion and the ongoing discussion, feel free to hop into my Facebook group. On Instagram, you'll find that through the link in my bio. On YouTube, I will post a link to that in the caption of this video. And if you want a little homework, I recommend digging into some more of your values, being able to determine what is a value judgment versus a moralistic judgment, and also tuning your ear to listen for, in your environment, you're probably going to notice now when people are making evaluations versus a genuine observation. And I might just encourage you to jot a few of those down in your journal so that you can start to train yourself to see and understand communication in this way. extra credit if you join my Facebook group and share your thoughts and reflections in the feed. So thank you for joining me here today, and hopefully I will see you tomorrow.